Let's go ahead and stand for the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the
United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'll read our mission statement. Grounded by our history as one of the oldest publicly supported schools in Wisconsin, Mineral Point School District is the heart of a small community that educates and inspires our students for a bright future in a big world. Okay, are you secretary tonight? All right, we'll do roll call.
Bergstrom,
Here.
Bush,
Here.
Dunn,
Here.
Harris,
Here.
Eisner,
Here.
Johnston, Gelding, here. All right.
Okay, this is a special meeting to certify the tax levy for the upcoming school year. Mr. Wainwright, you had a proposal for a budget amendment before we officially certified.
Based on estimates at the October 9th board meeting, we were looking at a deficit in our funding for the year. When the state and the Department of Public Instruction released all of their final budget numbers and pushed them into our revenue limit worksheet, we were given an additional $300,000 in equalized aid and the ability to have an additional $200,000 come in through the property taxes. So that money actually gives the district a surplus in the budget fiscal year 23-24. Through a lot of the conversations you've had through your board retreats, kind of retention, recruitment, and the possibility of trying to get as close to the CPI pay raise as possible. With the surplus, you could allow for an additional 2% in salary increases. And that would be in the ballpark of about $124,000. That's teaching, support staff, administration, Social Security taxes, any kind of retirement increase based on salaries for like staff teachers that get the Wisconsin teacher retirement. All in, all of those things combined is about $124,000. So you have about $152,000 surplus. So you would still have a surplus. We have a known increase in our water bill. As everybody in the city's getting a 60% increase, we know we're going to have to put more money into some of our utility payments. But I would recommend that you look at approving an additional 2% pay raise based on the 22-23 salary. So that would make it a combined 6% pay raise. Because this is your 23-24 school year. You don't want to give a 2% on this year because it ends up being more than 2%.
Yeah.
So if you're going to give a total of 6%, you go back to last year's salaries and figure out what 6% is there. That would be an additional 2%.
Would this back pay to the beginning of the current contract cycle?
Yes.
So I had a question around a concept that I've had a hard time understanding, which is with budget surpluses in this idea that somehow when we have a surplus, it lowers the money we get from the state the following year. Something to that effect. That conversation's come up a couple times, but then it goes into the general fund, right? Like any surplus that we have.
Cool.
Fund balance.
Fund balance, sorry.
We do.
Goes into fund balance. And then there was something about then the following year the state give us reimbursement on something, but I just don't understand that part of it.
School funding, I'll try to use some round dollars. So let's say we get $1 million from the state. If we don't spend $1 million, let's say we only spend $800,000 and we leave $200,000 in fund balance. That's not an expense. We just leave it in our cash reserves. The state will look at that and say, we've been overfunding you. You do that several years, they're going to reduce the amount of funding that they provide you, the amount of aid that they provide you, because
So
obviously,
maybe a key there that you just said that I hadn't picked up on before was if you do that for several years.
correct.
Okay.
There could be a slight hit if we're looking at leaving some money in fund balance and then having to turn around and spend some of that money the next year, kind of money in, money out. Then the state, there won't be that big of a hit to your budget overall.
Yeah.
Some of the budget monies that we left in fund balance, some of that dollar amount is what's called a restricted fund. We received some grant monies in the previous fiscal year that we couldn't spend completely.
Mhm.
Some of it depends on when we get the award. You know, it's hard to spend out $50,000 if you get that award on June 15th and you don't have any kids to work with. So that stays in that fund balance account, but it's a restricted dollar amount. Meaning then we have to spend it on that restricted purpose this fiscal year.
Okay.
So that will help balance that out.
Okay.
When we put money, when you vote to move money into Fund 46, that is an expense. The state looks at that as an expense, and therefore you're not being penalized for not spending that money.
Right.
Because it is an expense within that fiscal year.
On a year base, on a yearly basis, it's not so much a concern, but if we're consistently not spending the money they give us, then it becomes an issue in terms of them just lowering what they might give us.
Correct.
Okay, I understand it now. Appreciate it.
Yeah, the hard part is, people run it like a business and say, well, I'd love to, if I could, stick $300,000 away this year, at the end of this year, because I know, you want to give a bigger pay raise next year, I'll just take that money back out of the bank, or we need to put a roof on one of the buildings. I'll just put it away and, not use it. I'll just pretend it's not even there in my budget as we go forward. And then next year I'll have an extra 300,000. And that's when they look at things like that and say, no, you can't run it like a business. Fund 46, it gives us a little bit of that opportunity. It is an expense to that Fund 46 account that we now say we're going to use for capital maintenance on our buildings and things.
So that money we put in fund balance, if that were to affect our aid for next year, let's say we don't spend any of that out of fund balance at the end of this coming year, is it a dollar for dollar reduction in aid, or is there some kind of a formula?
There is a formula. It's not a dollar for dollar reduction. There is a formula that's used. And again, some of it is your tax levy. Some of it is, do you add more students to your enrollment? It kind of helps offset some of that, but it's not a dollar for dollar reduction in state aid.
Mm-hmm.
You remind me what is currently in our fund balance that would have restrictions on it from 22, 23?
We have three.
That curriculum you guys approved last year for the elementary books. We've moved it over to this year, and elementary still ordering books. Here, there's one that's called Kids Getting Ahead. 19,000, and we don't get it until like the spring. So we've had recently there one that like June 30th. This year it's not as big, but right between. We have to
The three of them.
Yeah,
Combined.
we have to report that to DPI, so that like your fund balance does year over year. Like, also we worked with signed, so DPI knows like over your expenses, assigned funds that we know we're gonna spend. So like, for example, like 200,000 just to do year over year salary increase. That's not really impacting.
Those three expenses, the DPI is aware that these are monies we get received as grants, and we know we'll have the expenses this year. So that kind of comes off that total number that was left in fund balance.
I guess where my head's at personally right now is like I want to better understand what like the modeling from Baird looks like in terms of when and if operational referendum might be needed. And I know we've talked about having gaps in potential staffing levels, potentially saving some of that money to address concerns that might come up through the school year. That's where my head's at right now.
And we've contracted with Baird to provide that model for us. It's just a matter of when can they get to it now and provide it to us. They're obviously busy with all school districts at this certifying levies and all those things as well. So it will be sometime, I would imagine, before the first of the year would be my guess.
I actually got a last week where I have to spend 5 years. We actually budget, but that we could
Okay.
think. And then the email just said once extended to expect 2 weeks.
Okay,
So-
cool.
Mitch and I are going to a workshop.
Along the same vein, I don't feel like we can approve this 2% tonight and be talking about going to referendum within the next 12 months. Like, I feel like for me, those two things are really hard to reconcile. And when we bring this out to the public for feedback, I can't imagine that there won't be like some questioning looks. Like, you gave a raise. It wasn't CPI, but you gave a raise, and then you had a surplus, so you went back and gave more raise, and now you're asking me for more money. Like, I feel like as a taxpayer, that's really strange messaging. So I'm reluctant to approve this if we're still in the mindset that we're going to need to be going to referendum in the next year. Although based on everything else we've heard recently, I'm not sure that we need to talk about referendum this current election cycle, and that maybe we are more than a year away from referendum, at which point then I am feeling like this seems like not a bad way to use the surplus. So I don't know that I have all the information I need to make the best possible decision tonight.
The difficult part coming into this fiscal year was the fact that it was the first year of a biennium. And there were all sorts of numbers being thrown out. What do school districts need? Well, most school districts, a number was, we need $1,300 because we didn't get anything the last biennium, and then an increase in CPI and those kinds of things. And then it was, well, we're not sure where the money's going to go. Are we going to give it to schools? Are we going to send it directly to the taxpayers with that school levy tax credit, which is what had happened in the previous biennium. When Madison said, well, we gave $600 million to school districts. Well, that didn't come to school districts. That went directly to property taxpayers in that school tax levy credit. This year, they decided to give $325 per pupil. They gave about 1.5% increase in special ed funding when the ask was to get to 45 and then 60 in the second year of the biennium. And it was, okay, we're going to go to 30%, and that's where it stays for the biennium. So, the difficult part, the beginning of this fiscal year, was not knowing what kind of numbers to expect. We have a little bit better understanding. At least we know there'll be $325 per pupil in the second year. So next year at this time, we can already build in an additional $325 in our per pupil revenue. It'll be what does our per pupil revenue look like, or what's our number going to be? How many students? We just had this conversation a bit earlier with that number maybe coming down a little bit, but if we add another 325, how many students do we lose in that 3-year rolling average? The 325 may offset it depending on where that number falls.
So in other words, now that you know how much money we're going to get this year and next year, how does that change your sense of a timeline for going to referendum in terms of our need to replace a budgetary deficit?
Well, I don't have all of the numbers because I won't have, what do the property valuations come in at? That was one of those numbers that had changed for us. is you get a June 15th projection. And then even in the revenue limit worksheet, which you have a copy of in your packet, it says the October 15th certification of general aid, it's line 12, letter A, and then just below letter D in that section, it says districts must use the October 15th aid certification. So we get one in July, they put that number in for you and you're looking at it going, wow, if we get this. But then even when we spoke with Jordan from Baird, he's like, that number will change. It will come down. It was a 5.7 number. He said, you're going to want to make sure that you look and come in, put your estimates in lower than that, which is what we did. So to say we got an additional 300,000, we got an additional 300,000 over our estimate.
Right.
It was a little bit less than the July 15th, but not much. I mean, it was 5.7 something. We came in at 5.69 when the DPI gave us that number. So in our estimate, it was $300,000 more than the school district's estimate as to what our aid would come in at.
So to project out like minimum, maximum, there's a little bit of play in there. So can you answer Dr. Dunn's question with a worst case scenario, best case scenario situation?
We can give our best estimate. And part of that will come on that July 15th number. That would be best case scenario. Here's what we say every property owner owes. Here's what the value of your property is. But then it goes, we have Waldwick and Mifflin and, town of Mineral Point. We have all these subdivisions of these municipalities that may question it, and all of a sudden that number comes in much lower. It's like, well, we're questioning how you valued this. This project didn't happen this year. Okay, well, reduce the value, your valuation of your property due to that. What Baird was able to tell us this year was that by and large, only 1% of our increase in valuation came from new buildings, new projects. And our valuation came in at almost 17% increase. The state average is around 12.5. Ours came in higher than that. And about 99% of that was due to just simply inflation. There wasn't any new buildings coming in. There wasn't any new projects that anybody added a new shed in the township. The city didn't add, new properties or anything of that nature. So it was simply because of inflation. If inflation isn't as high next year, those valuations might not increase. Maybe we make the state average. So we'll have an idea in July when we get an estimate. And I would say that's best case scenario. And then we come in, we talk with Baird. What are you hearing? What are you seeing as the financial experts in the world for us? And they're the ones that say, well, I would expect it to be that. I would expect it to come in a little bit less. What's a safe number to use? That would be our worst case scenario.
What you're saying is the anticipated taxes for the next year is going to depend on estimated values that are going to come out in July.
Yes.
Which makes it difficult for you to predict
And that's
a year ahead.
Yeah, that's the truth every year, every budget cycle.
Right.
But now at least I know the district would be able to levy up to another 325 per pupil. So we can look at, okay, we can give an estimate. Is our enrollment going to go from 718, as it went from 710 to 718? We can look at a 3-year rolling average. Do we know what are we graduating? What are we bringing in? We can get an estimate. We can put together kind of our best guess on enrollment and say, okay, our number is going to be 712. Well, we can take 712 times our revenue that we get per pupil. And that gives us an idea of what that amount of money is going to be.
Well, I hate to put you on the spot, but I feel like some board member votes are weighing on this estimation. So, given the fact that the new numbers we've gotten have changed us from a $350,000 deficit to a $150,000 surplus, would you be in favor of us going to referendum this spring. In April.
I would say no.
What about in November?
Some things that will play into that decision will be our transportation contract is up and we have to go out and request proposals. What's going to happen to our transportation contract that isn't necessarily a built-in increase on a 5-year basis. Our food service contract is also up this year. We would need to potentially go to a request for proposal for a food service contract or look at taking that on ourselves. What maybe anticipated increases are there? What are the other utility issues? We can budget for a good year for water. Now it's 60% more. We can budget for natural gas and all of a sudden prices go crazy. We can budget for, we pay the gas for the buses. We pay that fuel out of district. That's not part of our transportation contract. And we pay for the gas for any of the school vans and trucks and things. Well, if gas continues to hover around $3.20, that's $1 amount. But if gas goes up to $3.90, that impacts our budget in a negative, negative way. So I can try to give you my best answer, but it's based on what are the trends, what do we see happening?
So what would be your best answer given conservative estimates for all those costs?
Other items that impact the budget besides just a salary, I would say probably the earliest we'd be looking at a November referendum. So the November of 24 would be the earliest we would look at a referendum, potential referendum. But we would have better information prior to that, 70 days prior to that. We would at least have a July estimate, knowing what kind of budget numbers we're going to have. We'll have the Baird forecast by that time, so we can look at what potentially could happen in the 24-25 school year.
You could also ask a question, why not put the money into Fund 46?
Well, my other question was, to Justin's point, are there some serious staffing needs? For example, a reading interventionist at the high school level. That if we had surplus money, that you would put it as a high priority for making happen in this year that we should consider? Even with your proposal, that still leaves what, $26,000 estimated surplus, which I don't know how much a reading intervention it would cost, but I would assume it'd be a little more than that for a full-time person.
Base salary.
To be teaching license, right?
Our base salary plus potential insurance, going to put it probably 2 to 3 times that 26.
We sort of go around the table here and voice how we're feeling about it.
I think at some point I just wanted to get some clarification from Mitch, but I think if we're going to actually discuss our thoughts, pros and cons, we should have a motion on the table if possible. So, I would take a motion to accept this proposal for a 2% increase as proposed.
I'll make a motion that we approve the budget amendment.
Is there a second?
I'll second to move it to conversation.
Okay. So Bush and Harris. Okay. Do you want to make a comment?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you. 2 comments. One, I feel like, and this isn't a knock on Angie or anybody, but I feel like every meeting or every other meeting we come, it seems like there's more special ed needs. And I read in the email that we had more students that have moved in, and we talked about this at our so it was finance committee last month, where we were talking about adding the position, the co-op position with Pecatonica. And I felt that we haven't been real well prepared financially to take those positions on as they've occurred over the last year, and I'm just anticipating more. So that's probably the only reason why I'm leaning towards no on this. The other reason is that when we first were talking about the budget, I suggested higher than 4% to the board, and I got a lot of pushback from board members on that. And it wasn't that we couldn't afford it. That didn't seem to be the reason. The reason that I got from everybody was that 4% was generous and sort of good enough. You know, that in your all of your careers, at your works in your world, that 4% was like a good increase. So, you know, I've been thinking about that since we kind of collectively made that decision. And so I'm having a hard time negotiating that we would change that now just because we have more money, because it seemed like my fellow board members were saying it's not about money. It's sort of more the principle of it. The 4% is really good and in line with sort of what's happening in the real world. And so I sort of took that and internalized it and lived with it. And now I don't think we should necessarily change just because we have a little more money, especially in light of my concerns about special ed, particularly at the elementary and middle school level, where I think it seems like we're going to be adding at some point this year, and then we would actually have the budget here for that. So that's my 2 cents.
I'm right there with you with the special education need, and especially because the legislators didn't respond in the way we wanted in terms of special ed reimbursement and the numbers on the table from the budget on that, and the national increase in need and the actual local increase. Like, we're seeing regular enrollment where students have higher needs than they have in the past. The special ed thing, I totally agree. The other is my recollection of when we had the conversation around salaries was that we did not have the same information we have right now. So while it was the conversation was definitely about what is a reasonable increase, it was also because we wanted to be responsible for the future, because we knew that at that point, it was very clear we were going to have an operating referendum. Now it's less clear, and we may not need to have one this spring. So it feels like there's been a radical shift in terms of actual numbers. So it wasn't just principle only, I guess, is just in terms of the timing. So that's I think I remember it slightly differently. I don't know if it's accurate or not, though. And then the third thing is I'm having a really hard time feeling confident about voting when, I mean, the parts are always going to be moving, right? There's always going to be different gas prices. There's always going to be different. And so if there's this spreadsheet that we can mess with some of those things and make like worst case scenario, best case scenario, something in between, gives us a little better picture of what the future might look like. We're never going to know. Get a little closer rather than hoping it's going to be okay and then regretting it and needing to cut positions. We want to give something and then take it away, and then also take away positions that we need. That's where I'm at.
I've got I guess a couple, operational questions first. We've set the budget. So we're looking at an amendment tonight, right? So if we don't approve this expense, do we have to amend another expense account to levy the full amount?
No. This is revenue we know we're getting based on what you're setting the levy at tonight.
So be an over levy for an expense we don't have a place for?
Good question.
You're allowed.
Right, I'm saying though, we're over levying our expenses, our current expenses. Because we got this new revenue and the amendment is to add the expenses. So if we're not adding these expenses, do we still have the power to levy the whole amount without
Yes,
the expenses there?
yes.
And we don't have to have it budgeted anywhere.
Right now, it's not budgeted anywhere. There's no, normally when you have a budget amendment, you're taking it from
Right, that's
account
my,
A and putting it in
that's my
account B.
concern.
Right now, this is just revenue that you have, and we're asking permission to put it into staff salaries is the amendment you'd be looking at, basically. There's no specific count that it's coming out of.
So we would in essence be levying a surplus.
You'd be levying the amount of money you're allowed to levy.
Right. Right, that's exactly my point.
Like next one, we spend like our revenues are where they're at, this new information. Our expenses are, we spend exactly what's in the budget now. That's where next July, we will, that ding, equalization aid, because we have more revenue than expense.
Right,
And that's where that shared cost come in the property.
but it also comes into the optics of how we're going to levy a surplus and then talk about referendum in this same month. Like, I mean, I'm in two separate places. I support this, but also, I mean, we have to, referendum wise, we went from, okay, we're going to have a balanced budget and we're okay using $350,000 out of fund balance because we'll stay above our 15% for the deficit that we're going to have this year. Then we got all the extra money last year and it turned into, okay, we're going to use that extra money this year. And then we got this money. So I think the revenue conversation for anything soon, I'm sitting here trying to figure out how we would justify it. Because we still haven't spent the $340,000 we were willing to spend out of fund balance on this year. Now we have all this additional money we're putting in there.
Biggest thing for me at the end of the day is I think more often than not at board meetings, we've talked about gaps in staffing, whether it's special education or whatever topic. I feel like we kind of need to save some of this money for that turning into fruition and actually needing to pull the trigger on getting people in the door to kind of meet our standards.
I totally hear that. I mean, I don't know. I don't feel like we have like a position that we have to fill for this year that we haven't filled intentionally due to money. And that decision is negatively impacting the classroom. I think if that were the case, I think I would, consider this a little more strongly as far as saving the money for elsewhere. But I do agree with Rachel. I recall the CPI conversation a little bit differently. My recollection was we would love to provide 8% CPI, and we just couldn't because we were already predicting a deficit. We were talking referendum, and we were just trying to do the fiscally responsible thing and try not to overspend. And instead of providing 0%, we thought that the staff deserved at least a 4% and bringing with that a budget deficit and the potential for a referendum. And so in my mind, the issue of not going above 4% was absolutely a cost decision. And I think the conversation that we had regarding maybe comparing to peer industries and whether 4% was appropriate was kind of, in my mind, it was kind of like reconciling the decision. Like, in the face of teacher feedback saying, hey, you're not paying us a living wage. I mean, 8% inflation is the living wage. And so our salaries are now worth less in our community. And, you know, those kind of things weigh heavy on me. And so to counterbalance that, you know, I was, you know, considering arguments that 4% is still reasonable. It's still a raise, and it's still something that created a deficit that I think, you know, I could live with. So in my mind, the primary reason we didn't go above 4% was money. And now we're basically seeing an increase of, you know, $500,000. And I almost feel like someone said, if we only had a few $100,000, we would totally give 6% or totally give 8%, or we would, you know, totally give the teachers what they deserve, right? If that wasn't said plainly, I feel like that was the spirit of the conversation at that time. And now we have it. And so I you know, I think this is a difficult decision. I think there may be some anticipated staffing needs coming on the horizon. But
Can we just ask, I mean, do you have anything on the horizon? I would say Angie in particular.
3 days. You know, like we registered a couple new students in the last week, so they're still coming here, which is great. Love to have new kids.
We have new students who are here that were not part of the third Friday count in September. So they don't impact any aid so far this year. If they're here in the second Friday of January, then we'll get to count those students in part of that aid. So it's, you know, students are in and out. A higher need student obviously comes with a little bit more potential. I need a one-on-one aid. I need to hire speech and language teacher, or not speech and language, sorry, an ESL teacher. Or we have to provide some services in some capacity that's going to have an added cost to it somewhere.
So I guess, you know, to me, the worst case is to say, okay, we'll do the raise, and then we're here in December and we got to add a $77,000 position, and then we're going into a negative place for the year, like going over budget when we're sitting here and we've got this in front of us that could absorb that. I guess that's more from my own world, and I understand that budgeting for schools is definitely different, but that's so that's the question, you know, like if there's something that's sort of closer that you're like, you know, you're going to come to us in a couple months.
I don't know that I'm coming in a couple months. That's the hardest part. I mean, I shared in my update, one family researched school districts around the country, saw Wisconsin offered what they were looking at, then researched school districts in Wisconsin and chose Mineral Point. So they came to us from the Deep South based on internet research that this family did, you know, and we had no idea anybody was looking at us in that capacity, but yet it's a good problem to have. They like what we offer. They brought their student here. And, you know, that's a great problem to have when people want to come here and they moved here. But then, you know, when I lose students, and I've shared this with boards in the past, if I lose 10 students, all 10 students don't come out of third grade where I could say, oh, I'm going to cut a third grade teacher and save that money. Those 10 students are spread out through 700 students, and there's no place for me to cut, but yet I'm losing the value of all 10 students when it comes to the revenue side of it. You know, that's the hard part.
So in other words, I mean, are we on the cusp of thinking if we get one more student or if we get 2 more students this semester, I'm gonna need a new X. I'm gonna need to hire are we on the cusp of that? And do we need to plan for that in the budget now that we've got some money that we could put towards that?
I'll let Angie answer that question.
Advise we're stretched as we can. If we have more students move in, I don't know how we can physically support them with the staff that we have, even to the point of like our speech pathologists are stretched as far as they can go with students that they support. But that does, we might not get another student all year long too. So I just, probably not gonna happen, but
Also, like, how sustainable is being stretched?
Right.
It's October. Too.
So are we on the cusp of hiring a special ed teacher or hiring a instructional assistant or spending more like speech path dollars at CISA? Or it really depends on the student coming
it
in?
would depend on the student and their needs.
If I get a 6'7" freshman who can dunk with either hand, there's no added cost. There's plenty of room in the high school to absorb that new student. That's different than a student who comes to us that doesn't speak English or has their own individualized educational plan that needs services that, we don't necessarily have the space for. I mean, we talked about open enrollment. We had a cap there for that reason, but that's open enrolled students. We don't have a choice. If they move into our district and come with a need, we have to provide the services.
That doesn't include like the child mind responsibilities that we have a district, that we as a district or either. So, like we run events to try and make sure we're identifying 3 and 4-year-olds that would need early intervention. There's really some that their trajectory of school have received interventions, and then that eventually leads into it's maybe more specialized instruction than what we can provide. So it's not just the move-ins. There's always referrals going on, changes of the students that we do support too, as they grow and change.
So all things being equal, I mean, let's say, we have to have this conversation in a month. I mean, is the most typical solution a long-term sub for the remainder of the semester? Or would we really try to fill a full-time position mid-year?
I think it depends on the timing, with December graduates, if it was something that we were looking towards second semester, I'd say I think we should post it because there's going to be graduates just coming out of school. If it was right now today, I still think we would advertise it as a full-time position. And if we didn't have qualified candidates, then I'd probably go the long-term sub route as a backup. But anytime I can get a certified teacher that has practice instructing and instructional strategies and those are beneficial. And I think there could even be a sway that it's an instructional assistant, that's more supervision for the teachers. But right now it might just be, we need to be able to support kids when they're in the classroom. And that's getting hard to do right now too. So just trying to get into all the classes that we need to be in is kind of like a chess game going on right now.
Can you zoom out a little bit again? Because it's helpful to just hear, we want to maintain that level of educational services and support. Make sure staff are compensated. We want all of it at the same time. If we have, because I'm losing track of what money we have available, because it feels like we've asked to look at a budget amendment, but we're also trying to incorporate this tax levy reality and a raise to teachers. What is the 300 so we have 350 in fund balance right now?
You have more than that, but you basically allowed that money to stay in fund balance out of last year's budget.
Okay, so then what is actually available to us? Should have brought the
We-
giant stack of paper I had last
We now have
time.
a surplus of 150
Total.
in the budget. Yeah, and it was a deficit of 350 that we
Yes.
were gonna replenish with fund balance.
Okay,
And so the proposal is a 2% staff increase equaling 124K, which would still leave a small surplus in the budget
okay, so that
of
the,
26. Okay.
Yep.
So the question is, do we leave the 150K surplus in the budget? And, deal with community questions and say, why did you tax me for a budget that's got extra $150,000 in it? I mean, why did you levy that money against me? Or do we try to make the budget whole as best we can by trying to fulfill some promises that we maybe only partially fulfilled previously? And what we're trying to sort out is, are we anticipating some staffing costs in the near future that we need to take into account with this, that maybe could be covered by this surplus money in the very near future?
yeah,
And,
it's that revenue limit versus equalization aid. So the 150 includes, I'm sorry to be like, tell us to on the shed right now. But the 150 includes both the equalization aid and if we levied taxes.
the increase in revenue limit, correct,
Okay, together.
correct.
Got it. Okay. So that makes, now I understand.
And I have a procedural question. We have an even number of board members tonight. What happens if it's 3-3?
Fails.
Yes.
And actually, it's a budget amendment, so it's gotta be 5-1, correct? It's not just a regular.
I'd have to look at
I
that.
think budget amendments are,
Well, that's a pretty
Required.
important piece of information. One thing I had in mind thinking about this over the last couple of weeks is that, Andy, was it correct that we, a couple of years ago, before I was on the board, gave like a 1% bonus, but we weren't able to, it was like a one-time thing. We use ESSER funds or something like that to give a one-time 1%.
we gave the,
It was a flat rate. It wasn't a percent. It was a flat dollar.
well, we gave the 1.7, which ended up being an amount. Because it was the same for everybody.
We gave a $1,500 stipend.
Oh, it's $1,500.
Then we gave steps for,
Okay. But
that was,
it was a
we-
one-time.
it was $1,500 based on the 1.7%. The number, that's where the number came from,
Okay.
was one
And but it
time.
was like a bonus more. It wasn't going to be part of their salary moving on, correct? So I thought it was 1% when I was thinking about it. Another approach and considered is to make up that 1% with this money. And if we did 1% instead of 2%, I was just doing some quick math, that the 1% would cost us 62,000. We would leave 88,000 then over, which seems to me like it could cover the special ed costs, that we might anticipate coming in if we have more kids moving into the district this year. I think so. If you want to amend your motion, I could probably get behind that because we sort of do a little of each. And sort of in the spirit of, we had that bonus some time ago that didn't get added to your salary, so we'll take a stab at adding that back.
So I want to play out worst case scenario that we approve some sort of raise tonight. We find ourselves in referendum situation and a referendum fails because enough community members question our financial judgment in giving a raise when when the word referendum is already on the table. At that point, our consequences are really real. Like, we're not talking about not giving raises, we're talking about cutting positions.
Sorry, go ahead, Andy.
I agree with that. My other worst case scenario is we sat here and said teacher retention is important. And if we now can we justify we did the best we could with when we're putting money in the bank? And do we lose an important staff member because we did the best we could? That is the other end of worst case scenario for me.
I think to your point, Joni, I think the referendum question just got pushed way down the road by this change of situation. We just came into,
We spent $500,000
Yes.
in less
Yeah.
than 4 weeks,
that's about what we were talking about for a whole referendum.
right?
What if it goes the other way?
What do you mean?
I don't
Next
know.
year?
Well, yeah, I mean, we don't know. I'm not saying
Well,
like,
I think
I
you
just
pushed
wanna-
it for a year for sure.
yeah, I
I don't think anybody's talking 7, 8 years.
I think it's unlikely to swing the other way for a couple of reasons. One is we've been counseled to make conservative estimates so that if we're wrong, we're usually wrong in the positive,
Which is what this is.
Correct. Right. This is a conservative
It
estimate.
wasn't like the state said, hey, guess what? We found an extra $500,000. We're gonna give it to you. Here was a conservative estimate on our revenues. And here's what the actuals came in after the fact.
not against giving the 2%. I'm against giving it right now. Because we don't know enough, like to Joni's point. We don't know what utilities like water are gonna do. Nobody can answer for sure, which nobody really can, but like, is there gonna be staffing needs? Like, can we not wait a couple months? And then backdate it to the beginning of the year? If we feel like we're in a good position, we don't need any staff.
And we just go ahead and levy it and sit on it for now,
Yeah.
and then we could make the decision
Right.
later.
Okay, so let's talk like worst case scenario in that situation. We get to like April and like, we're doing great. Could we not say we're retroactively doing that 2% and paying it back at the beginning of contract? I know that's not ideal, but
I think what you would do is, we'd be having the conversation of paying CPI for the next year.
You can't.
You wouldn't be backdating in April.
The issue is this money is this year's money. You can't say, oh, we have a revenue excess here. We have that surplus. Guess what? We're just gonna move that to next year. You can't do
'Cause that'll
that.
go in
When we
fund
get to the end
balance.
of the fiscal year, those dollars have to be allocated somewhere. So if you wait until April, no matter when this is approved, you're going to look at the 2% is the same, whether it's tonight or December 1st or April 1st, the 2% will still be the same dollar amount.
have more knowledge.
You'll have a better sense of where we are in the budget by that time for expenses. But that 2% number or 1% number or whatever percent number it is, isn't going to change from tonight to whenever. That's why I understand the optics. The optics isn't necessarily the reality of, okay, we had a surplus, we levied, this is what the state says we can levy. We're asking to levy to that dollar amount. And then a year from now, we have to go to referendum. This levy isn't going to change that because we can't carry that money forward. That's part of that. Well, if you leave it in fund balance, you leave it in fund balance, and you leave it in fund balance, we can expend it out of there and spend that fund balance down. But all those years we're not spending it, we'll take a reduction in aid the following year.
That actually landed with me for the first time. Like that's why that's such a hard talking point, I think. Like we can't really kick the can and pile up our money because it's not how it works. So it actually could hurt us if we do that in terms of the equalization aid and the.
End of the day, you're still gonna have the same aid. If you don't spend it now, your equalization aid is gonna go down.
Yeah.
And we'll get that revenue, but now we have to levy more each year, raising the levy. They would see that impact.
But spending it now means spending it before the end of this fiscal year on June 1st or July,
30th.
June 30th. So we still could, is there any reason we can't retroactively pay this halfway through second semester?
There's no reason why you couldn't.
If we say, boy, we really didn't end up having to add 2 additional full-time special education teachers, or we really didn't see XYZ cost jump, more than we were expecting.
Bill, did I hear you propose a 1% increase instead of a
He asked if
2%?
Andy would amend his motion.
Ask if Andy would amend his motion, or, he could consider that.
Yeah,
Because I had just been thinking about that moment a few years ago where we did that thing that didn't become part of their salaries, which I thought was 1%. It was probably a little more, but I just
The
see that we could do something. Well, I wasn't on the board. I think it was a bonus.
It was a
Yeah.
stipend that
Yeah.
came out of the
Stipend,
ESSER monies.
right.
The $1,500 was pretty close to a 1.7.
Yeah.
So a
Okay.
3% pay raise was given. This one-time stipend made it for that year more like it was the 4.7 CPI increase.
Mhm.
But that 1.7 dropped off when calculating salaries for the upcoming year. I mean, it dropped back to that 3% number.
Right. I recognize that 4% is less than 8%, and that we gave that thing some time ago that didn't become part of their salaries. And I think teacher pay is important. I don't see a lot of high quality teachers jumping the ship from Mineral Point. It seems like we have pretty good retention, but we want to keep working on that. It would be a way that we could do something now and have some money left over, and it still wouldn't prevent us from in January if we haven't spent that money to do an additional 1%. I'd also be happy to wait and just do it all at once we've gotten into the school year, knowing that we have the rest of the year to use that part of the budget if we just don't feel like we have enough information tonight or don't feel comfortable with it. So
Well, why don't we vote on it if there's no retraction? And then if it fails, someone else can present a different motion,
Right.
or we can not make any other motion and move on. In my brief research about votes for budget amendments, it says on the DPI that the DPI recommends that a 2/3 vote be required if the amount of appropriation and purposes function as presented in the budget of the adopted budget are changed. So I don't know if
They
that's
recommend.
right. So would we have to have
Do
a
we have
board
policy?
policy? You know what? It's kind of a moot point. It's a moot point because a 2/3 vote would be 4-2.
I think it's of the full board when they talk about that. Not of the voting, not of the, that's what I remember. I don't remember it being a recommendation, but maybe it's simply a recommendation.
I don't think it's a board policy. that
No, it
budget
wasn't.
amendments-
I mean, I wasn't basing it on board, Paul. I certainly could be wrong. It's probably something I should have looked up before I came, but that was my recommended recollection on budget amendments.
Mhm.
I'm looking at policy right now, but I won't
2/3 of-
find it in time.
Okay, well, I mean, so if the vote's 4-2,
And we gotta figure it out.
I think we should consider it passed contingent on just confirmation of that.
Commission of the policy.
Yeah. That it's consistent with state statute and board policy.
And so if it's 3-3, what happens?
It fails.
It dies.
And then we can make a different motion.
no motion. We're just past the levy. Certify the levy.
Okay. Anyone want to make any other comments about this proposed 2% increase? No?
Really hard. Does that count as a comment?
Sure.
It does.
Welcome to your first vote as a School board, right? Go ahead, Mitch.
Bush,
Yes.
Harris,
No.
Eisner,
No.
Skelding,
No.
Bergstrom,
No.
Dunn.
Yes.
Motion fails.
Okay. Does anyone want to make another motion, or should we proceed to certify the levy?
We need to make a motion to bring the same topic back. Like, will it hold us accountable to say, make a motion to bring this raise back conversation or decision back after we have more budget data? Or can you just
I
bring
think we
that
would
up?
just
Just bring it up.
put it on the agenda when we want to, when we have more information.
Just want to make sure we do it. I think we will, because I'm not sleeping. Okay, just checking.
February?
I was gonna say I would
February?
prefer not to wait till April.
January.
Good, January.
I
I'd like
think the
us,
new hires at that point are 0.5.
I'd be fine with January, but after the first of the year, I'd like to revisit, do a temp check.
The January meeting, we can.
Okay, making a note.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, if there's no other motions, I'll take a motion to certify the levy as presented.
So moved.
Second.
I was worried I wasn't gonna get a second there.
Okay. Mitch, do you want to explain the levy any further, or is it pretty self-explanatory?
Well, the tax levy for the 23-24 school year will be $4,723,258 based on equalized assessed values of $570 million. Some change, I just rounded that off. The mill rate comes in at 8.28 per thousand, $8.28. This is an increase of 7.24% from the previous year. So we had 2 years of decreases. 21-22 school year was a decrease in the levy. 22-23 school year was a 0.08% decrease. This year is a 7.24% increase in the levy. You have the revenue limit worksheet. And I would just like to have you take a look at this quickly, since it's in color, right? Or no, yours isn't.
It is.
Is it perfect? So if you see in the bottom of the left-hand side, anything in green is calculated by a formula put in by the DPI. Anything in yellow is what the DPI enters on our behalf. And basically where it says kind of a peach colored district entered, that amount comes in under 14 A, B, C, 15 A, B, C, D. I don't know why it printed out in yellow now, but other than that, what you see is basically information that the DPI enters. So you have on the left-hand side, you have 710, line 2, the base average. So you get your 3-year rolling average. So a year ago it was 693 plus 723 plus 715. That was an average of 710 students. We received $12,560 for each of those kids, each of those students. That 793 dropped off. Our enrollment for the DPI, our 3-year average enrollment came in at 715. But by DPI calculations, that 3-year rolling average now jumped to 718. We get $325 per pupil. So now we're getting $12,885 per pupil. We have 8 new students at $12,885 and 710 students at 325. I would also like to point out on the right side of that sheet, number 10, if you go down to H, number 10H, see a number of $122,241. That WPCP and RPCP, that's the Wisconsin Parent Choice Program and the Racine County Choice Program. Those are private school vouchers that this school district of Mineral Point, money is coming out of our school district finances. And we can levy taxes for that. So it's money in, money out, but we're not seeing that 122. If we did not levy this money would come out of whatever monies we're getting in state aid. So we can at least levy this. We can say to the taxpayers, we need another 122,000 because we have to take that and send it to the voucher schools. And as a matter of fact, the money doesn't even come to us. It's the state saying, here's how much you can levy. Are you going to levy that much? And our answer has been yes.
And if we don't levy it, then we basically cut them a check for $122,000.
Yes, they reduce our state aid by 122,000 no matter what we do, whether we levy this or not. If we don't levy it, $122,241 is coming out of our state aid.
So if you add that to the money we spend paying for transportation, the transportation reimbursement, we're talking about at least $150,000 that we as a district send to support private schools, private
Correct.
education.
Correct.
Can you remind me, Mitch, do private education entities have to serve all students?
No, they do not.
Either comments about the tax levy trends or anything?
So just to make sure, so we enter rows 14 through 15 should be pink, which means we enter those amounts.
Correct.
Okay.
I just thought it was interesting to note that, I mean, the mill rate going down is nice, but I think what really matters to the taxpayer is how much am I going to be paying in taxes, right? So to me, the hard number means more. And
In the district tax, as I shared at our last meeting, the district taxpayers will be receiving a school levy tax credit. Once all of this is done, then that passes through the municipality. So Mineral Point can expect about $190,000 split among all the taxpayers. So while we're increasing our levy, that credit is coming back to the taxpayers to help offset that increase.
so that was one thing I was considering, is that they're getting a modest tax cut to offset this hit. Number two is, we've been dealing with about 8% inflation, and this is going up only 7% from last year. And it's not even as much as we levied 3 years ago in terms of a hard number.
Right.
So to me, those are three reassuring things as far as the stress we're putting on our taxpayers for getting what we hope is an excellent product for our community, and something that will be a reason why people continue to move here and want to work here and raise their families here. Okay.
Eisner,
Yes.
Harris,
Yes.
Gelding,
Yes.
Bergstrom,
Yes.
Bush,
Yes.
Dunn.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Motion to adjourn special meeting.
Moved.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay, Meeting adjourned. Thank you for joining online.